Me chamou a atenção que todos os teus cages são grandes, como tu falasses, oversize, grande tamanho. Em múltiplos níveis, tu não tem medo do overdistraction e dor axial permanente depois?
Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's a great question and an important one. So I believe that whether you're using a zero profile implant or doing a traditional fusion, generally speaking, whatever height that you place the cage, you're going to lose about 2 millimeters over time. That's been shown in several studies. And so I generally don't like to over-distract by more than 2 millimeters. So my average cage size is about 8 millimeters in height, because I think that as you follow them, by the time they fuse, they generally tend to subside by about 2 millimeters, and so I'll still have 6 millimeters of height. But you're absolutely right. If I see on an x-ray intraoperatively, when I put in my trial, that I have too much facet joint distraction, then I will undersize. So that is something that I'm very, very cognizant about, because just like you pointed out, patients are very unhappy when they have a lot of facet-related pain, so it's something that we really have to think about. I'll also make just one other comment. When we're thinking about ACDF, traditionally we're thinking about height, but when we're using zero profile implants, the size does matter, but the size that matters is the width and the depth. So it's really like the footprint, right? And we sort of learned from our lateral surgery in the lumbar spine, where we realized like the bigger the footprint, that's where we reduce subsidence and get better fusion. We don't have to jack up so much in height. So I think size matters, but not in height, more in width and depth. But you bring up a great point.
Thank you.
Dr. Shiraz, obrigado pela sua aula. Eu gostaria de saber se o senhor tem casos de fusão espontânea depois de artroplastia ou casos de osteólises, talvez por debris. Não sei se o senhor podia falar alguma coisa sobre isso. Obrigado.
Yeah, another very relevant question. Unfortunately, I have both. I have cases of osteolysis, and I also have cases of spontaneous fusion. But they were early in my experience. You know, we looked, we were very lucky. We got, Medtronic gave us all of their data on cervical disc replacement, and we got to look at all the x-rays and images. And, you know, what happened in the early experience of cervical disc replacement is that we were putting in disc replacement implants the same way that we were putting in our fusion allograft, too small. You know, we were using a 14 by 12 allograft, and so we would put in an implant that didn't get full coverage from front to back. And if you don't get full coverage from front to back, you are going to get contact when you move with your vertebral bodies, especially in the front. And everybody blamed debris. But actually the debris we found, the surgical technique didn't matter. The only thing that mattered that created both osteolysis issues and then spontaneous fusion was if you undersized your implant. So that's why, you know, I always tell my fellows that when you're doing a cervical disc replacement, it's a much harder operation than an ACDF, because if you put it in, if it's a little crooked, a little too small, not perfectly rotated, that patient ultimately is likely at risk for exactly what you said. So you got to get it just right. But yeah, I think hopefully we have solved the problem, because as now I've moved, as you probably saw in some of my images, I now use a implant that covers all the way from front to back and from uncus to uncus. I primarily use the Mobi-C prosthesis now, and I use the largest one every time, and I haven't had that issue of either osteolysis or fusion since I've shifted to the biggest implant for the last several years now.
Mais perguntas? Dr. Shiraz. The concept of cost utility that you showed, posso falar em português? Yeah. The concept of cost utility that is shown
to, I mean, the argument of, on your studies on health economics for disc arthroplasty, they don't apply to this reality here. Because in the Markov model that you input your data, you input American dollars and not Brazilian reais. So my impression is that we oversell this technique, that it's very difficult to prove superiority on adjacent segment disease, patient-reported outcomes, and neural decompression in comparison with the traditional ACDNF. So in conclusion, I think in reality here, it's very difficult to justify the costs. Don't you think we are overselling this even in the United States?
I think it's a very relevant comment. Cost-effectiveness literature is very much location dependent. You're absolutely right. So our hope is that by showing some of our methods, that those same methods could then be used to calculate in whether it be Brazil or Japan or China, you know, but you have to sort of do the study over again by location. I think as far as overselling and cost, you know, so I agree. I think if you do a good neural decompression, and I think if you achieve a solid fusion without kyphosing the patient, and you have good sagittal alignment after a 1 or 2 level ACDF, you are going to have an excellent outcome, right? But I think some of the things, such as dysphagia due to the plate, adjacent level ossification because you placed your plate too high or too low, the likelihood of potential pseudoarthrosis, right? So pseudoarthrosis is eliminated with a disc arthroplasty. The likelihood of adjacent level ossification disease specifically is eliminated with a disc arthroplasty. And I think that, again, you could create a problem if you don't put in the implant correctly. But I think if you choose the right patient, I think the elimination of pseudoarthrosis and the elimination of adjacent level ossification disease could potentially be an advantage. But I would be lying if I said, I mean, I still in my practice, I do many more ACDFs than I do disc replacement, only because with disc replacement, the patient selection is so important.
Another question is that about the argument for less dysphagia in zero profile cages and in disc arthroplasty. I haven't seen in your presentation good data that really shows that zero profile cage really reduces rate of dysphagia. And I actually haven't seen in the literature good data to make me use this kind of device. So again, this is your personal opinion, or is this based on real good data that zero profile cages or disc arthroplasty reduces dysphagia?
Yeah, I think that you know, data in what we do, in everything we do, is always challenging, right? So you know, we looked at our own patients, which was our paper that was published in Global Spine Journal just this past February. It was a small cohort, but you know, it was the best that we have, right? And that showed that there was a reduced incidence of dysphagia. We did a meta-analysis where we pooled all the data, and the data shows that there's a reduced incidence of dysphagia. Now, you can argue that all the studies, I mean, we eliminated so many studies because they didn't use the right type of dysphagia score, et cetera. So with what we currently have available in the literature, I think that we can say that there's a trend towards a reduction in dysphagia, but I can't say definitively that there is. But hopefully, I mean, we're looking at all of our patients now long-term, and hopefully over the next year, 2 years, I mean, we just need longer follow-up. But I can tell you anecdotally that we're seeing a difference, and hopefully in the next year or so, we'll have a publication with a much larger subset of patients to show the difference. But all we could say right now is that the data, as perhaps as bad as it is, does suggest that there's there's an incidence or a trend towards reduction in dysphagia, but not yet a statistically significant difference.
Obrigado pela excelente palestra. Houve uma tendência de uso do CAGE standalone, acho que aqui no Brasil, inclusive pela história de que a placa aumenta a disfagia. Só que recentemente tem sido publicado uma série de casos mostrando que o CAGE standalone não tem a capacidade de restaurar a lordose. Então tem havido alguma tendência a voltar ao uso da placa CAGE para normalizar a posição da coluna cervical. Eu queria ouvir a opinião do senhor e de todos.
Yeah. So I think that's an excellent point, and we worry about that. One of the reasons I showed, I didn't comment on it when I had the image up, but the 3-level standalone patient that I showed who had significant kyphosis, and were able to restore lordosis. So, you know, I practice at an institution where sagittal alignment, the chief of my service is Frank Schwab, and Virginie Lafage is our head of spine research. So if I show images with bad lordosis, I can't survive in my institution. So I agree with you completely that you have to work harder to get better lordosis if you're doing a zero profile implant. And that's why I, again, bring up the point that the technology is helpful here. So the newer implants are now coming with more lordotic options. But more important than that, I think the issue was that there was too much subsidence with the zero profile implants because we were using, again, the implants of the same size as allograft. So we were using a small implant and then with little fixation. So there wasn't a plate holding everything in place. So as we've gotten to use now much wider implants, the implant I use now is 20 millimeters wide and 17 millimeters deep. That's the implant that I like to use. And so that gets incredible coverage, doesn't create subsidence, and it comes at each segment. The implant gives you, you know, is 8 degrees lordosis. That probably gives you 1 or 2 degrees of lordosis per level actually in your surgery. But I think if we're cognizant of that, and if we do it thoughtfully, it is something that we can achieve. But just like you brought up, you have to think about it. So I wouldn't abandon doing zero profile devices because of the lordotic of the lordosis issue. I would critically evaluate your own patients and make sure and say, am I using the right size implant? Is it something that I'm thinking about during my surgery? Because yeah, it's not going to just happen, and it's much easier to make it just happen if you use a plate. But if you use a zero profile implant, you just have to be a little bit more thoughtful and careful during your surgery to get it. But if you think about it, you can make it happen.
Eu acho que, apesar de todo o movimento com relação a novas devices, novas tecnologias, na minha opinião, nada melhor que a placa cervical. E eu discordo do Dr. Shiraz. Eu acho que a placa cervical não causa disfagia. O que causa disfagia é a tração que se faz, é o tempo de cirurgia. Acho que a placa, não dá para culpar a placa, não.
Eu tenho é interessante, né? 3 opiniões. Eu acho que o CAGE está evoluindo. Se a gente pegar o CAGE que a gente utilizava há 20 anos atrás, era tudo reto. Era 0 grau. E era de... Às vezes vinha uma balinha soft para a gente, de material de implante, depois criou essa balinha soft, virou de fibra de carbono, depois ela virou de pique, aí depois, agora, ultimamente, esse pique já colocaram com vaporzinho de titânio em cima dela, abriram os buraquinhos, colocaram 5 graus, colocaram 8 graus, já colocou ela com shape lá em cima melhorada, agora já botaram um paraquinho de titânio, um parafusinho para cima, um parafusinho para baixo, 2 para cima, 2 para baixo. Agora, âncora que sobe, âncora que desce. Não há evidência científica disponível, apenas os trabalhos das empresas que produziram esse implante. A gente não tem como comparar isso, mesmo porque nós precisamos do tempo para poder identificar. Mas eu achei muito interessante porque a ideia da placa é uma ideia que ficou muito arraigada na nossa mente. Hoje a placa era largona, que ela pegava em cima da vertebral, depois ela ficou mais fininha. Hoje está um stripzinho, que é só um parafusinho em cada nível, segurando aquilo ali. Então a gente também não tem como comparar. Elas ficaram muito mais finas, mais maleáveis, a gente consegue criar uma lordose, que antigamente não conseguia. Então as placas ficaram muito boas e a gente via a disfagia mais naquela dissecção. Os distratores, antigamente, pegava
o distrator, o auxiliar ficava ali, a cirurgia era muito demorada, lesava o esôfago, mais de um nível, você não passava sonda nasogástrica. Sim, mas a gente está vendo isso tem 20 anos. E então o cara pegava aquele distrator, lesava o esôfago ali, estava tudo manchado o esôfago do paciente, não protegia. Hoje bota uma sonda de Galveston lá para poder ficar mais simples, nunca acha esôfago, né? Pega o bipolar, tem gente que seca isso com bisturi elétrico até hoje, coisa da época dos índios. Aí o cara puxa aquilo ali, lesa e depois fala para disfagia por quê? Porque queimou o esôfago. Aí o cara tá tudo com queimadura, parece ácido muriático. Aí o cara puxa, lesa, usa uma placa que o convênio libera, que tem 1 polegada de largura, um parafuso que nem bloqueador tinha. Então, realmente é muito difícil para a gente falar em termos atuais. Hoje, até hoje, o que a gente tem disponível, tem gente que em hospital público só tem aquela placa grandona, que tem 2 milímetros de largura. O paciente nem vai conseguir engolir, tem 2 milímetros. O negócio aperta o esôfago. Então, é diferente o que a gente tem. Só para colocar aqui.
Obrigado, Marcelo. Fizemos uma rápida terapia de grupo com a história que o Márcio contou aqui. Última pergunta, por favor.
Eu queria fazer só um comentário. Primeiro, fazer as minhas palavras as mesmas do Adson. A gente vai ficando um pouquinho mais velho e tem algumas pessoas que passaram por todas as fases da cirurgia cervical, desde o Cloward circular, da rolha do Cloward circular, até as coisas mais modernas de hoje. E a verdade é que me lembro sempre de um trabalho que definia que os cirurgiões sempre consideraram a disfagia como não como uma complicação, mas como uma consequência de qualquer cirurgia por via anterior, num período lá atrás, e que depois a gente mudou esse conceito. A verdade é que existem cirurgiões com 2 mãos direitas, existem cirurgiões com 2 mãos esquerdas, existem cirurgiões que fazem opções absolutamente inadequadas, existem cirurgiões que não têm condição de fazer uma dissecção interfacial. Mas, finalizando esse comentário, eu sempre me lembro, eu tive a obrigação de substituir um grande cirurgião de coluna cervical chamado Dr. Daniel Real no Master Cusses de Davos, uma vez em AO, e isso foi um grande problema. Eu tive que revisionar todas as complicações que eu tinha tido em coluna cervical. E o Dani sempre começava a aula dele dizendo que cirurgia cervical por via anterior mata. E a segunda coisa que ele sempre dizia é, se você não tem condição de fazer uma cirurgia cervical em menos de 3 horas, faça o que você tem condição de fazer em menos de 3 horas. A verdade é que a disfagia está relacionada, e se você fizer uma relação de todos os trabalhos para trás, está relacionada ao tempo de afastamento, ao conflito entre o cuff do tubo e a parede do teu afastador, ao modo com que você disseca, ao tipo de dissecção interfacial. É a sua via de acesso que vai impedir você ter de mais ou menos disfagia. Óbvio, se você usar uma placa, como diria meu amigo Márcio Vinhal, Tabajara, ela não vai, obviamente, te ajudar, mas ela não é a culpa da disfagia. Efetivamente, eu não encontro na minha clínica, eu gosto muito de placa e cage, hoje uso muito cage sozinho, mas eu não encontrava tanta disfagia assim quanto todo mundo encontrava. Acho que a dissecção interfacial e o cuidado do cirurgião é o key point para evitar esse tipo de complicação.
Ricardo, muito obrigado pelo comentário. O assunto levaria algumas horas para discutir o stress shield da placa de parafuso ou a carga axial que o disco tiraria. Não vai ser aqui, mas no café vamos ficar todo mundo convidado a continuar a discussão. Muito obrigado.